Before it was the place to go for airboat tours and seeing wild gators, well before becoming the largest environmental restoration project in history, this was the Everglades. A massive unmarked piece of land that early explorers called uninhabitable.
When the first Spanish came in the 16th century, they immediately told the king that it was liable to overflow and of no use. It was swampland.
The Swamp. That's the title of the book Grunwald wrote in 2007 about the Everglades. It's a title that represents the negative attitude people initially had towards the area. But in fact, this place is an environmental treasure.
The Everglades is a super unique ecosystem. It is the only ecosystem like it in the entire world.
Home to thousands of native plant and animal species, the Everglades are 7,800 square miles of wetlands, where water slowly flows from the Kissimmee River near Orlando all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. There is some evidence of prehistoric people living in the Everglades some 15,000 years ago, when the area was an arid landscape. The Calusa, the Tequesta, the Seminole, and the Miccosukee were the only humans who lived in the Everglades for hundreds of years, up until the 19th century. These natives called the land Pehioku, which means grassy water. White explorers went through a few names on their maps, but settled on the phrase Everglades. Glades after the tall sawgrass that grows in the shallow water, and ever because it looked like that grassy water went on forever. Throughout the colonialism era, the Spanish Empire claimed this land in what they called East Florida, but they never actually lived there. So with no use for it, Spain gave up its claims to Florida in 1821, leaving it to the growing United States. And when Americans started moving in, they realized something. The land underneath this shallow water was extremely fertile, and if they got rid of the water, they could use it to grow crops.
This was the age of manifest destiny, when Americans believed that we were kind of destined to tame the wilderness and turn it into something amazing for all mankind. And the Everglades was the wilderness.
In 1909, Americans began draining the Everglades, creating a land boom, and pushing out the natives so they could farm crops like sugarcane. And with business booming and all this new cheap land, Florida became a hotspot for developers.
This has been a place that was settled by dreamers and schemers and people who wanted to make a quick buck.
Developers like Henry Flagler came to the outskirts of the Everglades, creating metropolitan cities like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, and as the population grew, the fresh water from the Everglades became the perfect water supply. To these American settlers, everything was great, until the population got too big. People like activist Marjorie Stoneman Douglas started realizing all the development had been disrupting the ecosystem all along, and was now threatening endangered species and the new city's water supply.
She recognized that it was a river of grass. It wasn't just water sitting there and sawgrass that happened to be inside the water, that it was an entire ecosystem that worked together.
But the famous writer wasn't working alone.
One gentleman who worked tirelessly in the early days to establish the park was Ernest Coe.
In 1928, activists like Ernest Coe came together with a plan to protect the Everglades. Coe wrote a letter to the government proposing for the Everglades to be named a national park, and after years of efforts, Congress bought in. Partially. Lawmakers passed legislation to establish a national park in the Everglades, but it didn't protect the entire area. On December 6, 1947, this section of the Everglades officially became a national park. But people kept trying to control and divert the flow of water in the Everglades by building close to 2,000 miles of canals and levees along with 16 major water pumping stations, and those changes continued to negatively affect the ecosystem, to the point where half of it was gone and the other half was left damaged.
It is a place that was significantly altered and impacted by human activity, and that's why we're working to restore it nowadays.
Restoration efforts began in the 1970s after Congress declared that the federal government is responsible for protecting endangered and threatened species and critical habitat. And for more than half a century now, humans have been trying to undo the damage they've done to the Florida Everglades.